When I was growing up, it always felt like I was just background noise in my own family. My younger brother, Ethan, was the star, the one who could do no wrong. Mom and Dad doted on him, celebrated every little thing he did, and made sure he always had the best of everything. Me? I was the afterthought. Sure, they weren't outright cruel, but it was clear where their priorities lay. By the time I turned 18, I'd had enough. I left home, determined to carve out my own life far away from their suffocating favoritism. For years, I kept my distance. I built a decent life for myself in Denver. I got a steady job in marketing, met Emily, my smart, funny, and gorgeous girlfriend, and eventually married her. Emily and I had a good thing going. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I really thought we were happy. I didn't think about Ethan much during those years, or my parents, for that matter. I figured they were fine living in their bubble, and I was better off without the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan reached out to me last year. He sent me a message saying he missed me and that Mom and Dad did too. He claimed they wanted to fix things, to be a family again. At first, I didn't know what to think. I'd spent so many years convincing myself I didn't need them, but a part of me still hoped they'd change. Maybe time had made them realize how unfair they'd been. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let Ethan back into my life. At first, it seemed fine. Ethan started coming around more often, and I introduced him to Emily. She liked him right away. He had that charm that people are naturally drawn to. He and Emily hit it off, joking and chatting whenever he came over. I didn't think much of it at first. It felt good, honestly, to have a connection to my family again, even if it was just through Ethan. But then little things started to bother me. Ethan would stop by unannounced, even when I wasn't home. Emily would tell me he just needed someone to talk to, or that he was dropping something off. She always had an excuse, and I wanted to trust her. But something about the way they acted around each other started to feel off. Ethan would make little comments about how lucky I was to have her, or how we made such a great couple, and it felt forced, like he was trying too hard to sound sincere. Then Emily dropped the news that she was pregnant. I was thrilled. I'd always wanted to be a dad, and I thought this was the next step in our life together. But even in that moment of excitement, there was a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Ethan was coming around even more now. He'd make jokes about what the baby might look like or how great an uncle he'd be, but there was something about the way he'd glance at Emily when he said it that made my stomach turn. I tried to push the doubts away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust my wife. But one night, after Emily had gone to bed, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up her phone and started scrolling through her messages. My hands were shaking as I went through them, hoping I wouldn't find anything. But I did. There they were, texts between Emily and Ethan. Flirty at first, then more explicit. It had been going on for months. My worst fear was right there in black and white. And then I saw the part that made me want to throw up. The baby wasn't mine. It was Ethan's. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen. My mind was racing, but at the same time, it felt like everything had come to a complete stop. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just walk out the door and never come back. Eventually, I woke Emily up and confronted her. At first, she tried to deny it, but when I showed her the messages, she couldn't lie anymore. She admitted everything. She said she and Ethan hadn't planned for it to go this far, that it just happened. She said they were planning to tell me after the baby was born. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I just packed a bag and left. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap motel on the edge of town, my head pounding from the mess of thoughts swirling around. I had barely slept. How could I? Everything I thought I knew about my life was gone. My wife, my family, my future. It was all a lie. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what to do next, but nothing made sense. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't go back to that house. Around noon, I worked up the courage to call my mom. For some reason, I thought she'd understand. I thought, for once, she'd take my side and be outraged at Ethan. Maybe she'd even apologize for all the times she overlooked me in favor of him. I was wrong. The moment I told her what happened, she sighed, like I was complaining about something trivial. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I know this is hard, But Ethan didn't mean to hurt you. He just made a mistake. You have to forgive him. He's your brother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A mistake? I snapped. He slept with my wife. She's pregnant with his kid. How is that just a mistake? Mom let out another sigh, like I was being unreasonable. You can't let this tear the family apart, she said. Family is everything, and you need to be the bigger person here. Ethan's going through a lot right now. He needs our support. Ethan needs support? I said, my voice shaking with anger. What about me? Do I even matter to you? There was a long pause. Then she said, of course you matter, but holding on to this anger isn't healthy. You'll see that with time. That was it for me. I hung up the phone and threw it across the room, watching it bounce off the bed. For a second, I thought I might actually cry, but no tears came. Just a hollow, empty feeling in my chest. They were siding with him. Again. Just like they always had. Over the next few days, I filed for divorce and started looking for a new place to live. Emily didn't fight me on leaving the house, probably because she figured she'd end up with it anyway. My lawyer warned me that things could get ugly, especially if Ethan and my family got involved, but I was ready for a fight. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not this time. As I started packing up my things, Ethan showed up at the house. I didn't know he was coming until I heard his voice in the hallway. Hey man, can we talk? He said, like we were about to grab a beer together. I walked out of the bedroom and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, looking way too comfortable for someone who had just destroyed my life. What the hell are you doing here? I said, my voice cold. He raised his hands, like he was surrendering. I just want to explain, he said. Look, I know I screwed up, okay? But I didn't mean for this to happen. You didn't mean for this to happen? I repeated, my voice rising. What part of this wasn't intentional, Ethan? You've been sneaking around with my wife for months. He had the audacity to look hurt. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. It just happened. Emily and I didn't plan this. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. You didn't plan it? So, what? You just accidentally slept with her? Over and over again? Ethan didn't respond to that. He just looked at the floor, shaking his head. Then he said, look, I came here because I want to fix things. You're my brother, man. I don't want to lose you over this. That was it. I lost it. You don't want to lose me? I shouted. You already lost me, Ethan. You made sure of that when you decided my wife was more important than our relationship. And you know what? You can have her. You two deserve each other. Ethan tried to say something else, but I didn't give him the chance. I told him to get out of the house before I called the cops. He stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to argue, but then he turned and left. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I'd finally said what I needed to say, but it didn't make the pain go away. The divorce process dragged on for months, and Emily did everything she could to make it harder. She and Ethan painted me as controlling and unstable, which my parents were all too happy to back up. It felt like the whole world was against me. But through it all, I held on to one small victory. I got to keep the house. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was emotionally drained. I'd lost my marriage, my family, and any sense of stability I'd once had. But I was free of them. Or so I thought. For a little while after the divorce was finalized, it seemed like things were finally settling down. I moved into a new apartment on the other side of town, far enough from the house and the memories that came with it. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, and spent my weekends hiking or hitting the gym. Anything to keep my mind off what had happened. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to breathe again. Then, just when I thought I'd seen the last of the drama, my phone rang one evening. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I picked up out of habit. Hi, it's Mom, came the familiar voice. I almost hung up right then, but she sounded different, softer. I decided to hear her out. I know you don't want to talk to me, she started, but I need you to listen. What could you possibly have to say to me now? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She hesitated, then said, it's about Ethan. He's been having a really hard time. He's out of work, and with the baby here now, they're struggling. I thought maybe you could. I didn't let her finish. Let me guess, I interrupted. You want me to help him? Again. Because, of course, it's my responsibility to clean up his messes, right? Honey, he's your brother, she said, like that was supposed to mean something. No matter what's happened, families should support each other. This isn't just about Ethan. It's about the baby. He didn't ask for any of this. The baby. That was their trump card every time. The child I had once thought was mine. The child that was now a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. That baby isn't mine, Mom, I said. It's Ethan's. And he and Emily made their choices. They can deal with the consequences. I'm not going to bail them out. You're being so selfish, she snapped, dropping the gentle tone. I didn't raise you to be this way. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. You didn't raise me at all. You raised Ethan. I was just there. That shut her up, at least for a moment. When she finally spoke again, her voice was shaking. You're going to regret this one day. Family is all we have. No, I said firmly. Respect is all we have, and you've never given me any. Don't call me again. I hung up before she could say anything else and blocked her number. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, my chest tight with anger and something else I didn't want to name. Guilt, maybe. Even after everything they'd done, cutting them off completely wasn't easy. But I couldn't let them keep dragging me back into their chaos. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. I checked the peephole and felt my stomach drop. It was Ethan. I opened the door just enough to glare at him. What do you want? Can we talk? He asked, his voice unusually quiet. He looked like hell. His hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered why he was here. No, I said. Go away. Please, he said, holding up his hands like he was surrendering. Just hear me out. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. 5 minutes, I said. Then you leave. He nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. Look, I know I screwed up, okay? I know I hurt you. I don't even know how to begin making up for it. But things are bad, man. I can't find a job. Emily's been, well, you know how she gets. And with the baby, it's just a lot. So? I asked, crossing my arms. What does that have to do with me? I was hoping you could help us out. Just until I get back on my feet, he said, his voice almost pleading. You're doing well, right? You could spare something? I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. You want me to give you money? I said, my voice rising. After everything you've done to me, you think I'm just going to hand you cash? It's not like that, he said quickly. I'm not asking for much, just enough to get by for a little while. For the baby. There it was again. The baby. Like that was supposed to erase everything. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously low. Come on, man, he said, taking a step closer. Don't be like this. I said, get out. I shouted, shoving him backward. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. Fine, he spat. You want to be a bitter asshole? Go ahead. But don't come crawling back to me when you need something. I'd rather die, I said, slamming the door in his face. After that, I blocked Ethan's number too. For the first time, I felt a flicker of relief. I was finally cutting them out of my life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. With my family, it never is. I didn't hear from Ethan or my mom for a couple of weeks after that blow-up at my door, and I started to think maybe they'd finally gotten the message. I tried to settle into my new routine, focusing on work and spending time with the few friends I still trusted. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. But of course, the peace didn't last. It never did with them. It started with a voicemail from an unknown number. I was at work when the call came through, and when I played it back later, my stomach sank. It was Jenna. Hi, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I really need to talk to you, she began, her voice trembling. Things with Ethan. They're not going well. He's not working and God, I don't even know why I'm doing this. I need help. Please, Just call me back. I didn't call her back. I deleted the voicemail and tried to push it out of my head. But over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Jenna didn't even bother hiding her number after the first one. I'd get messages at all hours of the day and night, each one more desperate than the last. She cried, apologized, begged. She claimed she was only thinking about the baby, that she didn't have anyone else to turn to. One night, she even tried to remember the good times we had angle, as if that would erase everything she and Ethan had done. I stayed silent. I refused to give her the satisfaction of a response. Then, one evening, I was just getting home from work when my phone rang again. This time, it was my dad. Against my better judgment, I answered, hoping he might actually have something different to say. I should have known better. He started off with small talk, acting like nothing was wrong. "Hey, kiddo, how's it going?" he asked, his voice overly casual. I cut him off. "What do you want?" There was a pause, then he sighed. "It's about your brother," he said. "He and Jenna are really struggling. With the baby and everything, they've got a lot on their plate. I thought maybe you could help out, just for a little while." I couldn't believe it. "You're kidding, right?" I said. "Why does everyone think I'm responsible for cleaning up their mess?" Dad's tone hardened. "They're family, that's why. And family looks out for each other." "Funny how that only applies when it benefits them," I shot back. "Where was all this family loyalty when Ethan was sleeping with my wife? Or when you and Mom took his side?" "That's not fair," Dad snapped. "We just wanted to keep the peace. This isn't about the past. It's about helping them now." "The baby." "Stop," I said sharply. "Stop using the baby as an excuse. I don't owe them anything. I'm done. With all of you." Dad's voice rose. "You're being selfish. You're letting your pride get in the way of doing the right thing. One day, you're going to regret turning your back on your family." "No," I said firmly. "The only thing I regret is letting you people drag me down for so long. Don't call me again." I hung up and blocked his number, just like I'd blocked my mom and Ethan. I was shaking, my hands clenched into fists. How many times were they going to try this? How many ways could they twist the knife before they finally gave up? The next day, I got an email from Jenna. It was long, rambling, and full of the same manipulative nonsense as her voicemails. She said Ethan was barely around anymore, that he wasn't stepping up as a father, and that she didn't know how much longer she could handle everything on her own. She claimed she wasn't asking for money, just support, whatever that meant. I didn't respond. I deleted the email and went about my day, refusing to let her drag me into her mess. But apparently, silence wasn't enough of an answer for her. A few days later, I got home to find Jenna waiting outside my apartment building. She was pacing the sidewalk, holding the baby in her arms. I froze for a moment, then forced myself to keep walking. When she saw me, she practically ran up to me. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I just need 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I stared at her, trying to decide whether to listen or turn around and walk away. She looked exhausted. Her hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But whatever sympathy I might have felt was drowned out by the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. 5 minutes, I said, keeping my voice cold. "That's it." She nodded, clutching the baby tighter. "I know I don't deserve your help," she said, her voice trembling, "but I don't know what else to do. Ethan's gone most of the time, and when he is home, he's not himself. I can't do this alone. I just need—" "You need what?" I interrupted. "You need me to swoop in and save you? After what you did to me?" She flinched, her face crumpling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I hurt you, but I'm trying to do better for him." She glanced down at the baby, her eyes pleading. I shook my head. "You made your choices, Jenna. You and Ethan both. And now you want me to fix it? That's not going to happen." She started to cry, big, gasping sobs that drew a few stares from passers-by. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to finish. Finally, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you care about him at all?" she asked. "He could have been yours." That hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't speak. But then I shook my head again, harder this time. "He's not mine," I said. "And neither are you. Don't come here again. Without waiting for her to respond, I turned and walked into my building. Behind me, I could hear her crying, but I didn't look back. After that confrontation with Jenna, I thought she'd finally back off. She had to know there was no point anymore. I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. But with people like her, and with my family, it's never that simple. A few days later, I got an email from Ethan. He started with the same fake apology he always used, trying to sound like the victim. I hate how things have turned out between us, he wrote. I miss having you in my life, man. I know I screwed up, and I'll regret it forever, but I can't change the past. All I want now is to move forward, and I hope someday you can forgive me. I almost laughed. Move forward? How could I move forward when he and Jenna kept dragging me back into the mess they created? The rest of the email was even worse. He wrote about how hard things had been for him, how the job market wasn't fair, and how he was just trying to provide for his family. He didn't outright ask for money, but it was obvious that's what he was angling for. He even ended the email with, "If you're willing to help out, it would mean the world to me and to the baby." I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say. That weekend, I decided to unplug for a while. I turned off my phone, packed a bag, and drove up into the mountains for a solo hiking trip. It was something I used to do before all of this, something that made me feel free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had peace. No calls, no emails, no manipulative guilt trips. Just me, the trees, and the open sky. But, like always, the peace didn't last. When I got back home on Sunday evening, there was a letter waiting for me, shoved under my apartment door. At first, I thought it was another note from Jenna or Ethan, but when I opened it, I realized it was from my dad. The letter was long, written in his neat, precise handwriting, and it was the same nonsense he'd been spouting since this whole thing started. He talked about how family is everything, and how I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help. He wrote about how Ethan was struggling, how Jenna was overwhelmed, and how the baby didn't deserve to suffer because of my stubbornness. Then he went on to say how disappointed he was in me, how he'd expected better from me, how he didn't raise me to be this way. By the time I finished reading, I was shaking with anger. I couldn't believe the audacity of this man. He and Mom had spent my whole life prioritizing Ethan, making excuses for him, and sweeping his mistakes under the rug. And now he had the nerve to act like I was the problem? I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Their manipulation wasn't even subtle anymore. They'd given up on pretending to care about me. All they wanted was to guilt me into fixing the mess Ethan had made of his life. The worst part was, it wasn't just them. My whole life, I'd been surrounded by people like that, people who saw me as a convenient fallback when things went wrong. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I called my lawyer and told him everything. Jenna's constant calls and emails, Ethan's attempts to guilt me, my parents' harassment. He listened carefully, then said, "We can send a formal cease and desist letter. If they keep bothering you after that, we'll take legal action." It wasn't what I wanted to do. I hated the idea of escalating things even further, but I didn't see another option. They weren't going to stop on their own. A few days later, the letters were sent. I didn't tell Jenna, Ethan, or my parents that they were coming. I wanted them to feel blindsided, the same way they'd blindsided me over and over again. When the letters arrived, I got exactly the reaction I expected. Ethan sent me a string of furious emails, calling me a coward and accusing me of turning my back on family. Jenna left a voicemail, crying and asking how I could do something so cruel. My mom called me from a blocked number, screaming about how I was destroying the family and that I'd regret this one day. I ignored all of it. I was done playing their games. The day after the letters went out, my dad showed up at my apartment. I didn't answer the door. I didn't even acknowledge that I was home. I just sat on the couch, listening to him pound on the door and yell about how I was being childish, how I needed to grow up and do the right thing. Eventually, he gave up and left, but I knew it wasn't over. People like him don't let go that easily. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, exactly. It was too soon for that. But there was a sense of finality, of knowing that I'd taken the first real step toward cutting them out of my life for good. They weren't going to stop. I knew that, but neither was I. I thought the cease and desist letters might be the final nail in the coffin, the thing that would make them realize I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. For a little while, it seemed like they got the message. I didn't hear from Jenna, Ethan, or my parents for a couple of weeks. It was almost unsettling how quiet things were. But, like always, the calm didn't last. One evening, I came home from work to find my neighbor waiting in the hallway outside my apartment. She looked concerned. "Hey, just a heads up," she said. "There was a guy banging on your door earlier. He was yelling pretty loudly, saying he needed to talk to you. I told him he should leave before someone called the cops." I thanked her and went inside, already knowing who it was. Sure enough, later that night, I got a voicemail from Ethan. His voice was angry, almost frantic. "You think you can just cut us all out like this?" he said. "You think you're better than us? You're not. You've always been jealous, and now you're acting like you're some kind of saint because you're standing up for yourself. But you're just a bitter loser. You'll regret this. Just wait." I didn't call him back. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt tired. Tired of the manipulation, the guilt trips, the constant attempts to drag me back into their chaos. It was like they couldn't comprehend that I wanted nothing to do with them. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, something to use whenever they needed help. Then came the final blow. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer. "We've been served," he said. "Jenna is suing for an increase in alimony. Again." I couldn't believe it. I'd barely had time to recover from the last court battle, and now she was dragging me back into it. I asked my lawyer what the grounds were, and he explained that Jenna was claiming I'd caused her emotional distress by cutting off contact and refusing to support the family. It was absurd. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about control. Jenna and Ethan couldn't stand that I had taken my life back from them. We started preparing for court, just like before. My lawyer was confident we'd win. Jenna's claims were baseless, and we had plenty of evidence of her harassment to counter her case. But still, the stress was overwhelming. I hated that I had to spend more time, money, and energy fighting them when all I wanted was to be left alone. The day of the hearing arrived, and walking into that courtroom felt like déjà vu. Jenna was there, sitting next to Ethan, who looked even more disheveled than the last time I'd seen him. They barely looked at me as I walked past, but I could feel the tension in the air. When it was time to present our case, my lawyer didn't hold back. He laid out everything. The constant emails and calls, the unannounced visits to my home, and now this baseless lawsuit. He argued that Jenna was abusing the legal system to harass me, and that her actions were causing me significant emotional and financial harm. Jenna's lawyer tried to make her out to be the victim, as always. They brought up the baby, claiming she needed more support for his well-being. But my lawyer was ready. He reminded the court that the child wasn't mine, and that I had no legal obligation to support Jenna or Ethan's family. By the time he finished, it was clear the judge wasn't buying their story. The ruling was swift. Not only did Jenna lose the case, but the judge also issued a formal warning against filing frivolous lawsuits. He even granted me additional legal protections, making it easier to take action if they tried to contact me again. It was a decisive victory, but more than that, it was a turning point. For the first time, it felt like I truly won. As I left the courtroom, I glanced at Jenna and Ethan. They were still sitting at the table, whispering furiously to each other. They looked beaten, but I didn't feel any satisfaction in it. Just relief. I didn't say anything as I walked past them. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, things were finally quiet. I didn't get any more calls, emails, or surprise visits. It was as if they had finally accepted that I was done with them. For the first time in years, I felt free. Now, I'm focused on rebuilding my life. I've started therapy, something I probably should have done a long time ago. It's helping me process everything. My family's betrayal, the divorce, and the years of being treated like I didn't matter. I've also reconnected with friends I drifted away from and even started dating again. It's not easy, but I'm learning to trust people again, one step at a time. I still think about what happened sometimes. The anger isn't as sharp as it used to be, but it's still there, simmering beneath the surface. I've accepted that it might never go away completely, but I'm not letting it control me anymore. I've spent too much of my life trying to please people who didn't care about me, and I'm done with that. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And when someone shows you over and over again that they don't respect you, it's okay to walk away. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is choose yourself. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to finding out. And if they ever try to come back into my life, I'll be ready. This time, I'm not afraid to stand my ground.